Emma's here, I'm sure David will get in any time, and we've got a couple of things to get through first anyway. So welcome to everyone. Let me just go and close my door, otherwise I'm getting some other noise coming in. As a general rule, I will leave my microphone on, but if people generally turn their microphones off, that would be helpful, so that extraneous noise doesn't come through and it upsets the system. It tends to throw things out. So welcome to everyone for a remote meeting of Wittersham Parish Council, in particular Councillor Mick Burgess, who I saw earlier. He's our ward councillor at Ashford Borough Council. The developer and agent proposing a development behind Lloyd's Green are here, Daniel O'Brien and Ian Bull. The developer and agent for Stocks Road development, David Tatterton and Emma Hawkes. And the developer and agent, if I've got this right, Chris Pankhurst and Gary Mickleborough, I think. So welcome to everybody. First, I want to just make a few introductory remarks before we get into the formal business of the meeting tonight. We've got more members of the public here tonight than usual for a council meeting, and I'd much prefer, to be honest, to be holding the meeting in the village hall where it's easier to communicate effectively, and I expect you all would too. That's not open to us, so we need to operate this evening using Zoom. Since we are on Zoom, it'll make some things more difficult than if we were in person. We may get up to about 40 devices, although it's only 30 at the minute. It makes it harder than in person to spot who wants to make a point or ask a question. Although I did take Mick's tip after last time, and I've now got up to 49 on my screen instead of up to 25, so that was very helpful. Can I ask, please, that people exercise some patience with me and Paul? Paul will try and scan the participants when we're looking for who wants to make a point. It's not as easy as if we're together physically. I explained in the invitation, I hope it was in this one as well, how people can make themselves known when they want to say something. Please ensure your Zoom picture includes a proper name for you, and I think everybody's does, which is good, thank you. Zoom gets confused and stops working if two people speak at once, which we managed to avoid generally in the public meeting last week. Just one time it tended to start happening where we were getting little snatches of half a word one way and half a word the other. So please try and avoid that. Keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking, which will be very helpful. Regarding timing, I might need to exercise discretion during the public session if we're to get through within the length of the meeting that people can endure. Zoom's tiring. It's a tiring way to meet anyway for everybody. So please, can I ask everyone, don't repeat the points they've already made themselves or that someone else has done already. Just feel free to signify agreement briefly with someone else's point without repeating it at length. Some points on the agenda so we know where we're going. We have a total of 5 planning applications on the agenda for this evening, but I'll come to one of them in a moment. 2 of them were discussed for 2 hours at the public meeting last Thursday. The others are on tonight's agenda in the normal way, and we will have a public session where they can be discussed. I'm going to take the new 3, if I call them that, first in the public session so that residents who want to comment on them are not squeezed out, and we'll then move on to the 2 larger schemes, Poplar Farm and Stocks Road, in each case in the order they appear on the agenda, which is also, I think, the order we got them. Residents will then have the opportunity to raise briefly any other points on items on the agenda, or points they'd like to see covered in a future meeting subject to time constraints. That's as we usually do it, but of course many of you have not been here before. I need to have in mind, and please also you have in mind, that councillors are likely to require longer than usual to express and deliberate on their views or reasoning, particularly for the larger 2 applications, before reaching their decisions on them, so the public session can't become endless. We need to remember that it's a council meeting with a public session, not the other way about. At more normal council meetings, we apply a 4-minute limit to contributions from the public, but we don't do that on planning matters generally, and it's left to my discretion. Tonight, I'm hoping we can apply the same approach, but in view of the agenda, the need for my discretion is more likely to become appropriate if members don't apply a degree of self-restraint. I usually ask with normal meetings that the applicants, if they wanted to, make a few points at the beginning of their section and then answer or respond to anything they wish to in closing. We'll try and do the same tonight, but with the larger applications, if there are particular questions of fact that can be answered or resolved during the discussion, we'll try and do that. I'll have to take that as it comes, but I'm just explaining the way I'm looking ahead. So that is all my preliminary preliminary items. So then if I formally open the meeting, and we'll start with apologies and reasons for absence.
I don't have any.
Okay, good, thank you. Declaration by members of any interest, pecuniary or other than pecuniary, in accordance with the Council's Code of Conduct and its guide to the declaration of Council's interests in related matters.
None.
Think of any? Nobody has any? No. To approve or reject any application
None.
for the meeting, there won't need to be any for dispensations. A reminder to everybody, please, that the meeting in principle is recorded, although it doesn't always work, but the meeting in principle is recorded in audio, and that will go on YouTube, as indeed the one last week was already done. And so I'll now adjourn the meeting for the public session, and what we will do is, like I said, we'll do the smaller applications first. Now, let me, before we go on, say that the second one of those, which is number 21000153 AS Summer House, we're going to defer that to the next meeting, because we just heard today through Yvonne that after discussions with the Borough Council planning people on Friday, one of the drawings is being revised to actually change the scheme a little bit. So it's been, I think, Yvonne, you've had that conversation, haven't you?
Yes.
And we're going to defer that to the next council meeting, which is likely to be fairly soon enough, let's put it that way. So we've now got two other planning applications to go first on contributions for the public before we get to the two big ones. The first one is 21000139 AS, the disused cold store at Knoll House, Acton Lane, to be replaced in the plan, replacing the existing cold store structure with a new building of similar design to be used for short-term holiday lets. This is up Acton Lane, just adjoining the footpath that cuts through the house's garden. Who wants to talk about that? Anybody? Yvonne?
Can I just say that the footpath doesn't go through that property, the footpath goes through the neighbour's property.
Yeah. It's the neighbour, it's the owner though, isn't it?
No.
Oh, it's not?
No.
Oh, okay. All right, anyway, you're right. The house goes between the two, doesn't it? In the garden, and the other one is the other side. Okay.
Other side of the footpath.
Yeah.
I'm actually the owner, and yeah, the hi. The footpath goes down through the garden of Acton Cottage, which is next door to Knoll House.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's not yours. You are the.
No.
Okay.
No.
Right, you explained it exactly right then and corrected me. Thank you very much. And sorry I didn't welcome you at the beginning, Alex.
No problem.
That up. So does anybody want to? Do you want to say anything, Alex, about your application? I should start with that.
Nothing specific other than obviously the building itself is in fairly poor condition. We've had some damage to it from the winds that happened over Christmas, so it is reaching the point where it's becoming quite an eyesore. So it feels like a timely moment to do something with it. We are imagining its use as partly a space that we will use to work in, and potentially as a holiday let, but probably only in the summer and weekends only, I should imagine. So that's the most likely use of it. So it's also a partial workspace for us too.
Okay. Does anyone want to comment on that in terms? Yes, Alan. Have you got a question?
Just for interest, I may have got this slightly wrong. There's a not dissimilar conversion of a structure in Puddingcake Lane, Rolvenden, which is worth having a look at. You can drive up Puddingcake Lane and see it, and that's, I think, used for holiday lets, and I think I have to say, to me, that looks to be quite a success.
Oh, good. Well, that's really, thank you so much for that, because we haven't got, I know that those Kent cold stores were built in various places, but I haven't ever seen one converted. So as you see, the plan really was to keep it as close to the original form as possible, because we actually really like the curved roof form, and so we're very much wanting to retain that. So it'd be great to see somebody else who've done that. So thank you.
It's worth driving up Puddingate Lane just to have a look.
I will, indeed. I will definitely do that in the next couple of days. Thank you, Alan.
Right, anything else on the cold store disused? No? Okay, so we'll get to actually deciding between councillors what we think about the cold store plan when we get back into the council session from this council meeting from this public session. So that one's done. Now Summer House we're going to skip, and so we get to the orchard in Swan Street. Demolish the existing, I put this in short terms, demolish the existing industrial building and replace with 2 family homes. It's number 201-807 AS, the Orchard Swan Street. So where are we? Sorry, names are going out of my mind. Chris Pankhurst. Do you want to say, or your agent Gary want to talk about this?
Yeah, I can pick up on that for you, if that's all right. Yeah. I don't know how much members know about the recent history on the site. There was a recent application for a lawful development certificate to regularise the historic industrial use of the site. Following that, there was a permitted development application to change the use of the main building on the site into 2 residential units. And following most recent pre-application dialogue with planning officers at Ashford, it's now we're now presenting a scheme as an alternative to the permitted development proposal, which would be to demolish the buildings and structures on the site and replace with 2 chalet bungalow style 4-bedroom homes. Obviously, if there's any questions about what precisely is being proposed, happy to answer them, but hopefully you'd have seen from the plans it's what I would consider to be a relatively modest proposal on a site, a lot of betterment, shall we say, to the site, accompanied by the provision of landscaping, ecological enhancements in the form of a wildflower meadow, a new pond, and the retention of all the existing peripheral trees and hedgerows, making use of the existing access. There's no new openings from the road of the lane there. Any questions about that?
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have questions they want to ask, or points they want to make from the public at this point, or any councillors have questions they'd like to ask?
Question: is it just a single chalet bungalow?
It's 2, Colin. So the previous permission was for converting the existing building into 2 houses, and so this proposal is instead to replace that building with two detached chalet bungalows.
And is that is that in the same footprint as the barn?
No, this is a slightly different. It is a different footprint. The barn is located quite central on the site, so I think one of the houses would be more or less where the barn is now, and the other would be further to the west on the site.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions or points on Alan?
Sorry to be naive, but do you live at Archer's Post next door?
I'm the agent. No, I don't, and the applicant doesn't either.
All right, okay. And there's no objection there, is there?
Not that I'm aware of. I've seen that there's a few comments in support. I think there is one objecting comment, but I don't believe
I'm sorry.
Around who lives adjacent to the site, no.
The next door neighbour, I believe, is Clive Thompson from Archer's Post, and he did apply to join us tonight, but I'm just checking to make sure I haven't kept him waiting. He doesn't seem to be there. And obviously if he comes in, I don't know of any of his comments, and you're quite right, there's only one letter of objection that the public can see on Ashford Borough Council's website, and that's from Michelle Delaney.
Yeah. Yvonne, have you got updated views on that?
Yes, his concern, he's not so much concerned about a dwelling being there, but because when he bought the house, he was aware that there would be one. What he's concerned with is it not being on the same footprint. The fact that it's now changed and you've got two dwellings not on the footprint of the previous one. That's his concern.
Sure. I think the thing is that the previous one, of course, the permitted development, that went through anyway. I think we, in the Parish Council, said that we wanted Ashford to take a decision on whether the access on the bend of the road was safe. We didn't feel confident to look at that, but otherwise, I think we were content on the idea of converting the barn, which was really not within our purview anyway, because permitted development, outside of legal or isn't legal, and that's where we are now. Is obviously, as Gary has explained, the question of knocking the barn down and building the elevations on the plans to two-storey, four-bedroom houses, whether you call them chalet bungalows or not, they're really two-storey, four-bedroom houses, however you look at it, with an ensuite and a bathroom and stuff downstairs. Okay, does anyone else? Sorry, I heard somebody.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've just joined. I thought.
Oh, hello, Andrew.
Well, yeah, it's Clive actually, who lives next door. We're just doing it on Andrew's computer.
Oh, I see. Hello then.
I thought it was 6:30. Sorry, it was 6 o'clock. So I apologise for that.
So you're living in Archer's Post, Clive.
Yeah.
And what would you like to say to us?
Well, when we went to the planning department when we were buying the house, we was told that there possibly would be a dwelling on the permitted outline of the existing barn that's there now, which we was okay about, and we purchased the property. And of course, now we find out that you've gone for two properties, one further down the building that line of our property. So we're a bit concerned that on various, I don't know what's been said obviously in the last 10 minutes, but I may be repeating myself, but we are a bit concerned about one of the windows looking over our garden land and the conservatory, and the traffic coming in and out of the drive on the corner there. It's a very dangerous corner. So possibly we're looking at between 3 and 6 cars, depending on each house has 2 to 3 cars. And the footpath, there's a lot of people using that footpath. We're just a bit concerned about the flow of people coming in and out of that footpath with that amount of cars going into the drive. We're quite happy about one house being there, because we was told that when we went to the planning committee before we bought Archer's Post, and we knew something was in the pipeline. But we're not entirely happy with 2 houses being there, to be honest.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else want to comment on it at this point?
Jeremy, if I may, just in response to I think Andrew's comments at Archer's Post.
Collins.
Sorry, Collins, yeah. Obviously...
Clive, I beg your pardon, my apologies.
Clive, sorry, Clive, yeah, okay, Clive. The issue is to the number of the residential units. It's one, obviously, we've been in some dialogue with landing officers at Ashford, and the permitted development regime that was I suppose used to pay the permission to convert the building doesn't have any sort of threshold to the number of units that can be obtained. So there was, it's really whether the number of units that are proposed now is basically reflecting that which was previously approved from the council as part of the change of use of the existing buildings. I think as a concerned neighbour, it would be right for you to take concern regarding the potential for any overlooking or loss of privacy and any impact, obviously, on your property. And if there's any way that the plans could be amended to help allay your concerns in that regard, I'd be very happy to speak to you about that and hopefully amend the plans if that would help make you happy, basically. But in terms of the positioning of them, one of them is quite right. Is in the sort of the broad location of the existing building, and hopefully you'll see it is not any closer to the boundary than the existing building. And the reason the other one was put further to the west was basically so it did follow more or less the established sort of building line more. The alternative could have been, I suppose, to put two of them further back on the site, but I think that would have increased the likelihood of the route. I think it made it more difficult to avoid the overlooking issue that could arise in your rear garden.
The understanding that we thought it was going to be, if not one, but two semi-detached on the permitting on the outline of the original building. But of course, now you're going for two detached 4 beds. That looking into the permitted development of the land, but it's not what we had been told that may happen or visualised what would happen. So, as I said before, we're not against a property, but it comes across that we're surprised that you're going for 2 4 beds when originally we were told by Andrew Jolly and and a couple of neighbours that were on the understanding that it would be built on the existing footprint. So that's something that obviously we're concerned about. I'm not saying you haven't got the land to do it, but that's not in question. It's what you can get.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that, Clive. I see that Gordon is masquerading as Michaela. Gordon, you should be able, if you click the name, to be able to rename it so people will understand better that you're Gordon. Click the name and rename it, usually works. Okay, thank you for that. Is there anything else to say on that planning application down at Archer's Post? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, thank you. So now we will talk about going back to we've done the 3 smaller ones, we'll go back to the large ones. The first one, which was in order of the application, is Poplar Farmhouse, the outline planning permission for up to 23 dwellings, together with all necessary infrastructure. We're considering access only, all other matters are reserved. We, of course, had a long discussion on this on Thursday last. I should have given the number 2001782 AS. Now we have the applicant and his agent here somewhere. Everyone keeps jumping around on the screen. But somewhere we should have Daniel and Ian. Would one of you want to make any introductory comments before we ask people for their thoughts or questions?
Shall I just summarise where we're at?
Yes, feel free, Ian, if that's good for you.
Well, as you said, it's an outline application for up to 23 units. It's on part of a site that was originally proposed as an allocation by Ashford Borough Council in their local plan. The inspector that considered the local plan had concerns regarding primarily the impact on the area of outstanding natural beauty and ecological concerns. This application is on a smaller site. We've employed a chartered landscape architect who's considered the impact on the wider area of outstanding natural beauty and on viewpoints, and he's confident that we've addressed the previous concerns. We've also carried out detailed ecological surveys, which we feel fully address any ecological concerns that the previous inspector had. The other major difference is that rather than come via an access from Lloyd's Green, this application comes from the actual main street by Poplar Farmhouse. We've had pre-application discussions with Kent County Council Highways Department, and we've designed the access to meet their requirements, and there are some ongoing technical issues that are currently being addressed between our consultants and Kent Highways. Nothing fundamental, it's just various minor tweaks to the radii at the bell mouth, that kind of thing. The site, or the illustrative site plan, demonstrates that the site can accommodate up to 23 dwellings, maintaining significant areas of open space and landscaping within the site, and ecological mitigation. So really I'd be interested to hear if any members of the public have got any specific questions, or members of the parish council, and I can hopefully address them.
Perhaps I will start off. You said you're doing some, compared to what we're looking at the moment, which is on the site, and we're considering that tonight. You're saying there are tweaks being discussed with KCC, and nothing major as you put it, but that includes the radii. What changes are you making to the radii and anything else?
I can't give you a specific answer to that because that's not being finalised yet. We may not even need to, but we are looking at seeking to clarify things with the county council, and that may necessitate some changes to that, primarily to ensure that any refuse lorries can safely turn into the access.
Right, okay. Well, obviously it's not a case that it's partly safety, it's partly getting in there at all. I don't think anyone's going to want to be wheeling down 23 housefuls of wheelie bins down to Poplar Road and leaving them on the curb. Okay.
Jeremy, I'll try not who wants to speak, but may I make a request? I'll look out for waving hands, but as I'm running multiple screens, if you can or know how to put your hand up by clicking the indicator at the bottom, that'll be a help. But I will try. The first person I've got, Audrey and Nicola, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Known
Yeah.
as the Buxtons.
Yeah, my mother would like to speak.
Right.
Please.
Well, you know, this drive will not take the lorries and things, you know, up the side of Poplar Farm.
It's next door.
And we're next door, immediately next door. And I don't think it's very nice. You know, the number of people who have, well, if you say there's going to be 5 or 6 cars per household, can you imagine what it's going to be like living next door to a
busy drive?
You know, it's not right. It's awful, in fact. We're going to get fumes from the traffic.
We have a bedroom there.
Yeah. It's just not right. And the road is very busy, regardless of what other people have said, the council and all the rest of it. They want to live here. You know, when we moved here 40-odd years ago, it was quite a, you know, quiet road. But now it isn't.
Sure.
And you'll have all this traffic going out onto the main road. I don't quite see, and they run up on the pavement as well, which is terrible. I mean, I was nearly hit by one of the cars. Unfortunately, it stopped, but on the pavement again.
I've seen that 3 times this week. I've come over to Wittersham, and each time cars even when I've pulled over in a small gap, they disregard that and they mount the pavement and just travel along. And it's not just youngsters, it's all ages of people and all types of vehicle. I've seen delivery lorries, couriers. It's a very, very congested main road. And I can smell vehicle fumes opening my mother's front room fan-light window. I've stood in here where we're sitting now, and in the daytime I've actually been quite astonished at the odour of car emissions that are actually entering into a property. And I think you should have the right to clean air. You should be able to open your windows to get fresh air in. And I think that just reflects the level of pollution from vehicles that's occurring at the moment.
I don't see how you can possibly have 23 houses stuffed at the back of me. I mean, we'll be completely overlooked from the back side where the traffic going down the drive and, you know, the main road. Okay. It's just too much.
All right. Thank you very much, Audrey and Nicola.
Thank you very much for listening.
Sorry, I beg your pardon?
Thank you very much for listening to our comment.
That's fine.
Thank you.
There's several hands up.
Ian, just before I come to Julia, I think it was probably next. Ian, can I just clarify a little bit more about these discussions with Kent that we're having and highways? We talked about the refuse. What's the basic position of KCC as to the on-street parking on the south side? Are they allowing for that? Or are they assuming it can be magicked away?
They've got to assume that the on-street parking continues. Obviously, no one's proposing that it changes in any way. It's something that if we were asked to consider it, to try and facilitate that, we would consider it. But it's not been raised with us at this stage.
So essentially, you've got to be able to get a fire engine or a refuse vehicle into the revised drive layout with parking in place.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I just say, if it transpires that Kent don't believe we can do it with that parking in place, then they may consider requesting some other solution.
Sure, understand. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, with the parking in place, and obviously the other thing I noticed looking at the Kent Design Guide, which I'm not familiar with, but you will no doubt know extremely well, was that you seemed to be getting not the normal of any of them, but the minimum of all of them. And obviously, if you associate several minima together, you're making something very difficult. You know, you might have one bit that's narrow or one bit that's a smaller radius, but if you pile them all up as the minimum, it makes the geometry very difficult.
Can I just clarify on that? What we have proposed at this stage is what Kent Highways requested when we had pre-application discussions with them.
Okay.
The only change in that was that Ashford Borough Council asked us to try and incorporate what's known as a pinch point further up, which we did to satisfy Ashford's initial comment, and that's where we're at the moment.
Okay, and you probably know that the Ashford desire for the pinch point actually potentially offends the Kent Fire and Rescue, because your 3.1 metre pinch point is what they will accept going through a gate, but not necessarily, I know they're looking at this again, or they were, whether they'll run up a 20 metre stretch of it.
Yeah,
that's for them, really.
We're kind of in the middle between Ashford and Kent, trying to decide what they both want.
Yep, I understand that, and I sympathise with the sort of knockabout, but I'm just raising that point.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the next one was it Julia?
Yeah.
Hello, Julia.
Unmute, Julia.
Hello. Sorry. I'd just like to acknowledge what the Buxton family said. This access might look all right on a plan for Ashford, but it's certainly not going to work, and it might affect the parking for the residents living along that road. And I'm personally against this planning application.
Thank you. Colin, I think I can see. You're on mute, Colin.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. The question follows on from the questions that the Buxtons said. Has any acoustic assessment been made?
No.
That was recommended by Ashford Borough Council, I understand.
They said that it may be required before the application is determined.
The message, as I understand it, says that they would recommend that application is accompanied by an acoustic assessment.
Well, they haven't requested one since we submitted the application.
There's a letter that your owner should have dated in October.
I haven't seen that.
I have a copy.
Okay. Well, that's something obviously, I mean, I take entirely Colin's point. We haven't got that in front of us tonight, and in a way we're not the acoustic specialists, but it appears that we might need to be dealing with that with ABC once our points go into Ashford, because I'm sure that Colin would want the point that he's just raised to be mentioned in the Parish Council's response.
Well, certainly if Ashford asks us to do that, we will do it.
Okay, that's what you'll think about that, obviously, if it comes up. Now, does anyone else want to raise issues? Yes, hello, Paul. You're on mute. Yeah.
Well, it's just,
hello, Jeremy.
It's
Go on, Paul.
Which Paul do you want to talk to?
Paul Hutchinson.
Right, hello, Jeremy. As you'll have seen, I've raised an objection letter with Ashford Borough Council concerning the access road. I believe that the scheme as put forward is totally inadequate. I'm not really sure how we've got to this scheme, because a year ago there was an email from the Borough Council to the developer suggesting that a minimum of 5.5 metre roadway was required for the 23 houses. In fact, at that stage it says the development was up to 25, and this is recorded in the documents on the Ashford Borough Council planning website. I'm also concerned about the design of the Bellmouth with the main road. It appears that pedestrians are just pinched out, in that the Bellmouth will run across the existing footpath on the Tenterden side with basically a hedge next to the development, so we'll have no visibility at all. We've heard that they're considering some technical changes. I would say that the scheme that's put forward at the moment is just totally unacceptable.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Who wants to go next?
Laura and Robin.
Laura, Robin, yeah.
Hi, guys. Just to confirm with Ian, if he's able to confirm it, or perhaps yourselves when it comes to this situation, but obviously existing residents parking along the road, can I make sure that one of the things that Ashford or Kent Council are not thinking about is installing double yellows or a single yellow line or any kind of parking restriction to edge existing residents out, so that the new residents of this housing estate will be able to get access and such?
Okay, thank you for that. I think that...
Jeremy, can I just add a point to that? Yeah, I think you raised a very important point there, because if double yellow lines were put in on Poplar road there, notwithstanding what we might think of them. Displaced vehicle parking is basically going to go down Swan Cottages and Swan Street and the other roads. So it's not a question that we've got a great swathe of alternative off-street parking. The cars are currently parked in Poplar Road for a fairly obvious reason, and I think it's important that we're all aware of that and raise that point.
That's good, thank you, Paul. Who else would like to speak on the Poplar Farm proposals? Oh yes, hello, Jill.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening all. Just to clarify,
sorry, are you just answering a question that's already gone, Daniel? That's fine if you want to do that, and then Jill coming after.
Yeah. Sorry, yes, there was just an answer to, I will check with obviously Ian, but Colin mentioned about an acoustic survey, and I believe there was an acoustic survey carried out which should have been forwarded with Ashford.
All right.
So I hope that clarifies that, but I will find out what's happened to the mix-up in the morning, but there was an acoustic survey carried out.
Okay, if there was, it should be on the site, or should go on the site anyhow. Okay, Jill, off to you. Over to you.
There is an acoustic site on the website. It's by Anderson Acoustics.
Oh, okay. Good. That satisfies Daniel then.
Okay, just another sort of add-on to the sort of double parking and trying to do alternative solutions. I mean, it was mooted about doing off-road parking to Swan Cottages. I don't think they realise quite the drop that there is from the road down into the gardens of Swan Cottages, and it's on a slope all the way down. So I think the consequences of even trying it would be, I think, pretty poor, to say the least. And it's worrying me because there is such a lot in such a small area now. If you've got the vehicle access route with all its associated service vehicles, delivery vans, you name it, it's right now, there's going to be an extra entrance in for Poplar House, right next to Wesley. There's 2 bus stops. There's the shop with cars reversing out into the carriageway on the opposite side. And I just think it's an accident waiting to happen, really.
Okay.
It's really, with a village, you can't do the same things you can do in a town or a larger place like Tenterden, where you might have more options. We're really restricted by the situation we have, and I just don't see a good way around this at all.
All right, thank you. Who else was wanting to speak? Colin.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
On Saturday, I went outside near lunchtime, and between Swan Cottages and the village shop were 16 cars in line. Dax had 6 people visiting with cars at the shop, and past Owen Court was 2 removal vans. During a period of time I was there, people went on the pavements to pass other ones, and at other times it was completely blocked. Added to which, we have not considered at this stage the reuse of the pub. If the pub was to come back into life, there'll be even more increased transport. So I think that's got to be taken into consideration as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. So interesting points there. Okay. Are we done on Poplar Farm? Okay, would Ian or Daniel want to just sum up then on your side of that before we move on to Stocks Road?
Can I just say then that obviously most of the concern relates to the access and the implications of that. All we can do is comply with the necessary requirements which Kent and Ashford put to us. I'm not a transport engineer. We've got a transport engineer on board who's been talking to both Kent and Ashford. And what we are proposing is what we've been asked to do by the Highway Authority. I appreciate your concerns and members of the public, but as I say, all we can do is comply with the relevant standards, and hopefully the Highway Authority agree.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Right, so we'll move on then to Stocks Road, the land between Tower House and Mount Pleasant, which is 2100115. The construction of 28 dwellings and 2 self-built plots with associated parking, access, landscaping and open space. This is a full application, so you'll have had the opportunity to see a lot of information on the website of Ashford with floor plans of elevations and artist schematics of views and stuff like that, and some photographic views and a whole load of other stuff. I know it's a very big site, takes a lot of studying, but on the other hand, that is what we need to put in. So can we suggest that either David, yes David, or Emma, do one of you want to say a few words before as a sort of introduction?
Yes, Jeremy, I'll say a few words if that's okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so this is an application for, as you say, Jeremy, 28 dwellings and 2 self-build plots on land to the north of Stocks Road. The dwellings will be set within a significant area of amenity space, including a green corridor. There'll be a new vehicular access onto Stocks Road, together with a footpath link into the village. This is very much a bespoke scheme. It will be dwellings with a modern design, but with traditional materials. Dwellings will be a maximum of 2 stories in height. Many of them will be single story, 9 in total will be single story. The site does have a previous planning history. In 2015, there was an outline application for 27 dwellings on a smaller area of the plot than what is the subject of the current application. And at the time of the 2015 application, 37% of the units would have been affordable. The previous application went to appeal and it was dismissed by the inspector due to concerns about the justification for a major development in the AONB and on the layout, which did not promote, in the inspector's view, principles of good design. An important point, though, in the inspector's decision was a recognition that addressing local housing need in the village, where it would have significant local benefits, would be an exceptional circumstance. The policy context in terms of local plan policy has changed since the appeal. The local plan has now been adopted, and there are policies within the adopted plan, including policy HOU 5, which is for residential windfall development in the countryside, and also policy HOU 2, which is for local needs housing. Prior to the application submission, we have engaged extensively with Ashford Borough Council. We have had a series of meetings from November 2018 through to January 2020, including key involvement of Simon Cole, who at the time was head of planning policy and is now the head of planning. And we were very keen from the outset to work with the planning officers to develop a policy compliance scheme. Because what is effectively coming forward here in the context of the adopted local plan is a hybrid approach. So it is a combination of policy HOU 5 and policy HOU 2. We did, through having this extensive engagement, gain the agreement of officers that the hybrid approach would be acceptable in this instance in Wittersham, due to the outcomes of the local housing needs survey And we've also had confirmation that the scale of development proposed in terms of 28 dwellings and 2 self-built plots, so 30 plots in total, would be appropriate in terms of fulfilling the criteria of policy HOU 5. Officers also provided comments on the design, and those comments have been fully taken on board prior to the submission of the application and are incorporated in the design that's now on the table in terms of the application. We've also engaged with the Parish Council, so we had a meeting with the Parish Council in October 2020, and that was an opportunity to introduce the revised scheme, but also to engage and get views of parish councillors on potential local projects that could benefit from developer contributions as part of Section 106 agreement, and we also gained advice in terms of carrying out a public consultation. Public consultation took place in November and December. Obviously, with COVID restrictions, it had to take place online. We couldn't have anything in terms of a public exhibition, but that was an opportunity for local residents to see the scheme and to provide comments on the scheme, and also to make suggestions in terms of the local projects approach. So in summary, we feel that this is a high quality scheme with a range of house types, which blends traditional and contemporary design in a landscape setting. The development will enhance the settlement of Wittersham by providing 40% affordable housing, securing local housing need, and also creating a development with a generous amount of open space, which will be for the enjoyment of existing and future residents of Wittersham. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Emma, let me just clarify one point on that. When you said that, I can understand the confusion, when you said you consulted the Parish Council in October, of course it was Parish Councillors who met you online, you put it before us as a courtesy because it was on its way to being introduced to the public, and we gave you suggestions on that in the sense of, yeah, that's great, let's get it on the website. It took a couple of weeks before you did that, I think, but and in fact I announced all that on next door. So just to be clear, it was not a parish council meeting.
No.
That would have been in public. It was just introducing it to councillors. We had a Zoom discussion. You actually gave us the opportunity, I think, to look at all the stuff that you then gave the public in your website. You told us what the address of the website was before we published it. We had a look on the website and we had a Zoom meeting to discuss it with you, and I think we asked some questions of David Taffordon and his architect and what have you. That was really just for us to know what you were doing and to, as I say, make sure it got good public consultation. Okay, then we go on from that. Who would like now to address that? Hello, Miriam. You're on mute.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Right, okay. Just a few things that Emma said that I'd like to just go back to her on, other things to raise, but a couple of points of clarification. She talks about the inspector's decision at the appeal. I appeared at the appeal with a number of people from the village, so I know what was said and I understand the report. I have it here. When we went to that appeal, as I explained before, the need in the village was for 17 affordable homes, 17. It has now gone down to 7. That is quite a dramatic drop. The inspector also said about having market housing alongside the local needs housing. Ashford's general policy is to avoid this if at all possible, but they do accept that in certain exceptional circumstances it may be necessary to add some market housing to make the local needs housing viable. Now, 7 local needs housing is all we have identified. you're actually proposing 30. The inspector, in the face of 17, did not see exceptional circumstances. I cannot see how now you can actually say we've got exceptional circumstances. So I would like you to explain, please, how you think going from 17 affordable homes down to 7 now provides the exceptional circumstances that didn't exist in 2016. So if you could answer that question, please.
I think it's important, Miriam, to bear in mind that we now have an up-to-date local housing needs survey. At the time of the previous appeal, there was the previous local housing needs survey, and that was, at the time, the most up-to-date survey available. And so that was what the inspector used during the discussion and to come to his conclusion on that proposal. Things have moved on in terms of that survey being reviewed and updated. So now the survey is dated January 2019. And it is clear from that local housing needs survey that it has identified affordable housing need, but also a need for market housing. And that's including housing for older persons. So yes, you're right, the conclusion is different from the perspective of when the housing needs survey was carried out, and at the time of it in January 2019, the amount of affordable housing local need identified is less than the previous one. However, the report identifies a wider need as well. And so we, as part of, I referred to the discussions that we've had with Ashford, the pre-act discussions that we had involved not just planning officers, but the housing officer. And they also had a subsequent meeting with Tessa O'Sullivan, who carried out the local housing needs survey, because they were very keen to identify what was meant by local housing need and what could be included as local housing need in this particular circumstance. And following that meeting, we then had another meeting with Simon Cole and the housing officer to discuss how it could come forward on this particular site, in the light of the local housing needs survey and in the light of newly adopted local planning policy, because that has fundamentally changed from what it was at the time of the previous appeal. So there is a need identified, a wider need identified in a local housing needs survey for Wittersham for both affordable housing and market housing. And that formed our starting point for bringing the site forward at this particular point in time. But it was being able to find that balance, that hybrid approach, which would be acceptable to the council, and that's planning officers and housing officers, as well as meeting the local housing need.
Right, Jeremy, Alex McIntosh has got his hand raised.
Alex, sorry, Miriam, were you saying something?
I hadn't. Well, if someone else wants to speak, there was a couple of other things I wanted to ask Emma. She hasn't really answered my question there with exceptional circumstances, but I'll leave that. I don't see any exceptional circumstances, but I was just going to ask her about the modern design. I think at the appeal, Claire Tester from the A&B unit made a very, very strong point that it's very rare to find that the historic edge of villages is still intact. And that's what she thought was really important to preserve on this eastern edge of the village, the historical edge of the village intact. So I would question whether putting modern houses there, modern style houses, is going to keep the historic sort of edge of the village. Well, it's certainly not going to keep it intact, but I'm just wondering whether that was entirely appropriate when this is a very historic edge of the village on that particular side of the road. That was just another point I wish to make, but I'll let someone else speak now.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. So it's got Zoe and Alex, I think you said, Paul.
It's
the other Alex. Yeah.
Hi, Emma. Sorry, I just picking up on Miriam's point. Can I just get you to answer the question? Wasn't need for 30 new houses identified?
It identifies 14, so 7 affordable and 7 market houses are identified in the local housing needs survey.
So what justification do you have for a scheme of 30 houses?
There is an acceptance that there is a wider need as well. Obviously the amount has gone down, but the surveys that were carried out, we know from the landowner and the workers that he's got that there are other families and individuals who are looking for local housing in Wittersham to be available. Yet they did not have the opportunity, for whatever reason, to respond to the survey. So
there's just you have a documented need for 14 new houses. That is what is documented.
That is what is documented, yes.
For 30. Okay, thank you.
I think part of this is the fact that although one puts out a survey and hopes to get 100% response, you don't, of course. And I can't remember what the percentage response was. It was one of these situations where the people who advise us at Action on Rural Communities in Rural Kent say, oh yes, you've got a good response, but that good response might have been 25% or 35% or something. I can't remember what it was. Now,
I think it was, Jeremy. I think it was either 25 or 28%. Yeah. It was certainly less than 30.
Now, the people who respond, of course, are partly the ones who are interested, because if they're not interested, they don't bother to respond. You know, I don't need a house, I've got one kind of attitude. But at the same time, there can be a lot of other people who don't respond because they don't read things, they didn't get it. I think it went out with Outlook. It got thrown in the bin too soon. You know, there are all sorts of possibilities. So you can't simply multiply it up. But it's a brave person who says because there were only 14 reported, it would only be 14. And one's always fought between those two numbers. Greg,
Greg's the next person with a hand up.
Thank you. I did raise a number of points online to Ashford Borough Council, but I see they haven't yet reached the website. Jeremy and I also sent a copy to you, so I hope councillors have seen that, or we can talk about it. So I won't drag through all the points, but if I may just pick up on this fundamental issue which is being discussed from a slightly different point of view. I am concerned about the capacity of the village to absorb the numbers of people that 30 new dwellings implies. And while I understand the need, the principle of the need for new housing in rural areas, that should be sustainable, and it should be placed in areas which are capable of supporting the numbers. And this is a village with fantastic qualities, but it does lack basic amenities. And if as many as between 100 and 140 people are going to come into this village, they're going to be driving in and out of this village to get to basic amenities. And whilst in time, of course, the village could grow to have a pub, a post office and other things, it doesn't at the moment. And I am seriously concerned that this development is just too big and that it should be half the size. And I think that's what's being said. So there are lots of details around the design itself and some very good qualities around the design, but I do have some safety concerns which I raised at the public meeting the other night. But fundamentally, I think there is too much here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Yes, I mean, it's one of those things where it's very hard to judge how fast a village or whatever else a community can grow. It's grown hugely in the past because we have all the social housing, which is post-war, or almost all is post-war, because that's quite a long time, went up to the 80s or 90s. But yeah, 30 houses is a lump. It would be, in lots of ways, nice to build them in dribs and drabs, but it never seems to happen that way. Okay, somebody...
Audrey's got her hand up.
Hello, Audrey.
I'd like to say that the footpath, which is, when we came here 40 odd years ago, that was a footpath leading up to that paddock.
No, Mum, they're talking about another development.
Oh, well, I don't know about the other development.
Yeah, but they've moved on.
Yeah. Can I still talk about this, that 40 or 30, 23 odd houses that they're going to build behind me?
Can you just do it very briefly, please, Audrey?
Right. I would just like to say that was a track, a dirt track leading to the paddock. And now suddenly it's going to be, I've been approached about the, land, and I can't see how they're going to make that wide enough to take without damaging the hedge and things like that. It's awful,
Okay, thank you, Audrey. I think we've got that point pretty clearly in mind. Thank you for re-emphasising it and the history of it, but I think we've got that.
Yeah.
Greg's still got his hand up, but I don't think means it at the minute. Paul Denning.
Yeah, I thought it might be useful, and I offer this with no opinion, but just some research that's been made available to me. I'm concerned that maybe we're just seeing part of the picture when it comes to affordability. Affordability obviously changes for a number of reasons over time. The people you talk to, the sources of information. I'm sure maybe they would, but I would suspect the majority of people on this call would agree it's recognised in this country that we are facing an affordability housing crisis. It's well documented. The opportunity for young people to get on the housing ladder is very, very much reduced compared to most of us who live in Wittersham. We have quite an older population. There's some research over last year. In 2020 in Wittersham, there were 14 house sales. The total sale value was £8.7 million. The average house sale price in Wittersham last year was £830,000. Only 5 of those sales was under £500,000. Now, I've had a number of admittedly younger people, but not all younger people, majority of younger people over the last few months have mentioned to me in different circumstances their desire to get on the property ladder, find affordable housing and stay in Wittersham. The other aspect is, and you only have to look at the campaign for the protection of rural England, which is out and freely available, that the impact of keeping families together reduces the cost of social care in our country. I think that the affordability figure of 7 is a fraction of what is there. I know people who've personally said to me, when they heard there was the opportunity for a self-build and to stay in the village, were really excited. There are people that are living in what Jeremy referred to as the post-war social housing who are really keen to move out from families, to start their own home and move on. And I think it's important, and this was made to me by several people, that these decisions are being taken not for the people in this call, really. It's for the next generation and the generation after that. So I'm not offering any opinion at the moment on the style, the density, the layout. I have my own views on that. But I think it's really important that we accept our social responsibility to understand and be part of the plan for future affordable housing in not just our village, but our country.
Thanks, Paul. Brian, I can see your hand up.
I'm slightly on a limb here because I rather support a development in Wittersham. I feel that whatever development is proposed is going to be objected to strongly by a number of people. And I know nothing about the sort of finances of developing a site, but I can't believe that it's in the developer's ability from a financial point of view to build an awful lot of housing, which is cheaper. And therefore, if you want that, I think you've got to look to other people to build these places. There are organisations around to do it, but you will not get, I don't think, a developer who can afford to put that level of affordable housing in. And I think the village has got to change its attitude to a degree that we look forward. We want younger people in this village. I think it's lovely to see Lara and Robin are here, who are new people, I think, in the village. You need young blood. You don't need old gits like me. You need young people to drive this village forward. You want young people to have children to bring them into the village. The objection the other night was that the school was full. That school, when it opened, probably had 10 pupils. It's now got whatever it's got. It will develop as the village develops. As far as the sewage problem is concerned, which I hear time and time again, my opinion on that is everybody can complain about it and say that it's going to stop development. But somebody, and I think possibly a subcommittee on the parish council, should have the remit to approach the water company who have a statutory right, I understand, duty to provide decent sewage. They have to get the MP involved, they've got to get ABC involved, and they've got to resolve this problem. Because it will be a problem with any development that comes in if the sewage is not being dealt with correctly. And I just feel there's got to be a sea change within the village to actually allow these developments, perhaps not as big as they are, and I certainly disagree with the first one, because that access there is nonsensical, opposite the shop. But the other one, I don't have a problem with, maybe too dense, but you're just going to get objection after objection after objection, and there's no positive response of how we overcome these problems. It's just, we don't want it. And that's what I think maybe need to be addressed. We have to have a different view on it and try and take these matters forward, because the village will benefit, in my opinion. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. I think Julia and then Miriam. Julia just got her yellow hand up in a moment ahead. Julia.
Sorry about that. I was actually congratulating Brian for what he was saying, so I wasn't putting my hand up, but it was a congratulatory. So.
Oh, okay. Brian, you've been applauded, and now Miriam will say what she thinks about Brian's comment.
Right, okay.
Yeah, off you go.
I agree with Brian to an extent. I think the village does need some more affordable housing. We definitely, and I've repeated it, we do need some more bungalows for the older people. We've needed them for years, no doubt about that. And young people are great for the village, especially if they've got young kids, because they'll help my football teams. I'm not against young people at all, but I think we've got to understand that we live in an AONB and there's policies to protect the character of the village, and large developments are just simply not allowed unless there's exceptional circumstances. This is a designated heritage asset. I don't think a lot of people really understand how important our AONB is. I know Jeremy said in the last meeting we're just tagged on to the end as though somehow we're not that important. We're a really important part of it. Just because we're on the very fringe of it doesn't make us any less important. So we have to accept the reality that we've got to have smaller developments. And I'm all for a smaller development. So if someone was coming forward with a small development, say 12 or something, and it was genuine affordable housing that people can genuinely afford. I mean, those of us who have got, children who are looking to get on the housing market, we know how expensive it is. Are they going to be able to afford these houses? And if we're looking at the other side of affordable, that these are the social sort of rented houses for village people, we know for a fact that 4 were built at Jubilee Fields, and we could only find 2 qualifying families for them. Lovely homes, but they couldn't go to village folk. They went to people outside the village. As I said before, I've absolutely no problem with people outside the village at all. Very welcome, especially if they've got children. But I think we've got to be realistic as to what we can actually have in our A and B. So yes, I agree with Brian. Yes, vitality into the village. But this idea that somehow we're all going to wither and die if we don't get more houses is absolutely ridiculous. We have a pretty strong community here. And I think a lot of people came to Wittersham because they really loved the rural feel of it. There's very few houses in this village that can't look out of their window and see a field. We have a real connection with the countryside. We are so lucky in the centre of the village that we have those fields that belong to the Mallet family. Because if they went on to develop all their fields, God help us. But they haven't. No. They respect the character of Wittersham. And I believe that Lady Mallet has left pretty clear instructions to those of her family who inherited the fields about what her wishes are. So we're incredibly lucky in many ways. But for the sake of a few people who have filled in a survey in good faith that they are going to get a small development, ends up with 30 or 23. That's not right. We filled in that survey. I filled it in. I might have said I wanted to downsize for all I know. My children have moved on. But it says a small scheme. That's what we voted for. That's what we wanted, a small scheme. It is so unfair to use that housing survey to justify either 30 or 23 or 53. And if we get the one down at the Meadows as well, goodness knows how many it will be. The one sensible thing that the planning consultant said from the Popular Home site is said you are going to set a precedent and none of your fields will be safe. So we either protect our fields or we don't protect our fields. And I'm for protecting our fields, but I am absolutely not against all housing. I am for affordable housing that genuinely the youngsters are going to be able to either afford to rent. I mean, rents are ridiculous, and be able to get a mortgage with some of the good government schemes. And also bear in mind that Ashford have got a fantastic reputation, actually, of delivering, far better than a lot of authorities. They've got their own companies that build the houses. They built the 4 at Jubilee Fields. It's not some developer who's making money out of it. It's our own council. And I have been in touch with them, and they would consider building some bungalows here on land that they own. They would consider it. I asked the parish council to get in touch and pursue that avenue and not condone building in our A and B to this extent. I applaud you for wanting affordable homes, Paul. I'm absolutely with you on it. Believe me, I am. There's nobody more in favour. Some of the youngsters will tell you that I helped them to write their statements to help them get the houses. They know I'm on their side for housing. I am not against everything. People would like to give that impression, but I am not. So I'll hand over to other people now, but really I am definitely not against a smaller scheme at all.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarification. Leslie, I think you were waving your hand earlier.
I would just like to ask Miriam, who I don't, totally disagree with at all, but on the point of if building was to take place, and if you agree that building at some point should or could take place, my question is where? Because every time a site comes up, it's rejected because it's either, well, there's no room in the village, and anywhere bordering the village is in AONB.
Right, okay, shall I answer the question?
Yeah,
okay. I think the important thing to know is that we've actually had quite a bit of development over the years. There's two possibly come up tonight on the agenda. Now, Jeremy's talked in the past about 3, and he keeps quoting me as saying 5. It wasn't me that says 5. It was a survey which went out to the village, not me. 87% of people did not want large developments, and that's a fact. But so we get a small amount of housing coming up, and it adds up to quite a lot of houses. So we put that into context. In terms of the affordable, what I think is we need to be working with our local authority, who has said that there may be potential in the village for another small development. Now that would be great. If we have 3 bungalows and they go to 3 older people who need them, that releases 3 family homes, if they're wanting to downsize, I'm talking affordable now, which other people can get. So I say we have to have a different approach. We had the housing, I think it was the environment group as part of Voices. It was covering housing and environment. And we put forward what came out of the survey, and then it all died a death. I think we need to go back and we need to look again. What my view is that the parish council have gone ahead and they forgot to take their village with them. And I think you'll find that your village will support affordable housing in the right places. What they will not tolerate is huge developments in the AONB, which has clearly been stated, damage the character of the AONB. The inspectors have said it, Ashford have said it, and Claire Tester at the AONB unit in Flimwell has also said it. She appeared at
I'm sorry, I'm sorry about this, but the parish council have gone ahead leaving the village behind. What have we gone ahead on?
Well, in terms of after the housing needs survey, I knew nothing of what had happened, Leslie. Absolutely nothing. And I go to parish council meetings. I had no idea you'd been to see Ashford. Absolutely no idea. No, I hadn't. It's not minuted that you went there. Right. Parish council meetings. It's never been discussed, because it had been discussed. I'd have had an opinion. So
I'm sorry. What do you mean we went to Ashford?
Well, it's been said that you went to Ashford and had a meeting with the housing. Jeremy said it.
We had.
No, you went, but obviously the chairman went.
Ashford came to us. If you
sorry, beg your pardon. I misunderstood.
Ashford came to us, if you put it that way.
Right, okay.
At our invitation, in the sense that one housing officer accompanied the lady, I think it was, who did the survey, Tessa O'Sullivan, and she saw, I think, 3 councillors who were available. And the reason for that, it wasn't a discussion with Ashford as much as to have them help us interpret the housing survey. We commissioned the survey. It was very much welcomed by Ashford, and particularly by Simon Cole, that we were doing that. We got Ashford money to help us pay for it from the member grant of Nick Burgess, the councillor. And when we had got it, and we discussed it at the parish council meeting, I remember, and you were there, and I remember saying something along the lines that it was quite confusing. It had lots of different, you could add it up this way, add it up that way, and cut it and dice it and all the rest of it. I remember you said at the time you found it actually quite, comprehensible. You didn't use that word probably, but something like that. and we invited Ashford and Tussler O'Sullivan to advise us on what they felt it said and where it pointed us. Now, at that time, they gave us thoughts, no more than that. This wasn't council business, this was just things to think about. And we went off and thought about them. You know, I don't see how council meetings are for council business. Sometimes things have to, if you were in Ashford, very little goes to the council meeting. Most of it is done in the civic centre. Parish councils are tiny by comparison, but the idea that nothing ever happens unless it's done in a council meeting is crazy. We still have a chief executive, which is Yvonne, in fact, and we still have councillors who have to think ahead, think about what comes up, think about how to respond, and they have to keep their eyes and ears open to stuff. You can't just block all that out and say, oh, it must be in a council meeting all the time. Okay, someone else was waving their arm. Yvonne.
Can I just clarify, please, on the local needs housing that was put up at Jubilee Field? They were the 4 houses for 2 local families because they were 3-bedroom, and the people that were on the list didn't qualify for a 3-bedroom house. They wanted smaller ones. So we had people on the list, but they couldn't get into those houses because of that reason. So it's not that we didn't have people available wanting houses, they just didn't meet the criteria for those particular houses. That's it.
Indeed, and a point that follows on from that, of the affordable that is being planned in this scheme, 3 of them are 1-bedroom bungalows we've talked about before, 6 are 2 beds, one of which is a bungalow. So, you know, 2 beds are in there. Ashford decided to build 3 beds because that makes better financial sense probably. But then I know one of the families in Wittersham would dearly love to have had one of them and been happy to pay the rent, but didn't qualify because instead of having a son and a daughter, she had 2 daughters, and one of them was a bit younger than tick the box. That's where we lost them. It was tragic in that sense. I'm with you. I would dearly love to have seen village families in them.
I think that is actually something that genuinely needs addressing, because I mean I know of a family too, and it's a different one, and who now would qualify, but in fact it's gone. So I think something needs to be definitely done about the qualifying criteria. We've actually got a lot of affordable housing in the village. We've got a higher percentage than a lot of villages, but they actually don't go to the village families because of Ashford's policy. And so I think the policy needs addressing, but of course all the parish council can do about that is put pressure on to say that, you know, village families are not getting these jobs when they come up. I mean, I would definitely support that.
Yeah. Okay, Miriam, I think that's a good point, and I think that when we come to the end of this, which we will have to soon, because otherwise councillors won't have time to talk themselves, I think that the applicants on this one have talked about the sort of requirement that they would seek to negotiate with Ashford as to local connections, or whatever you call it. So maybe you have the opportunity of talking to us about that. Julia, you were just putting a hand up earlier that I saw, and I think Zoe and Alex as well. Julia first.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment, particularly to Miriam. I'd like to remind you that the parish council have the greater good at heart. They have not got any personal interest in any of these planning commissions, and any suggestion that they have done something underhandedly is really offensive. And I'd ask you not to do it anymore.
I really don't think I actually said that.
I think, to be fair to Miriam, I didn't take it that way.
No, so, well, thank you. I hope no parish councillor actually took it that way, because
Julia makes a point
I was making.
Of useful, you know, it's a useful point to make because there's always that risk. But to be fair to Miriam, I honestly don't think that was in her mind. She was anxious about the way that the administration was done rather than anything more underhand. So I'd be happy to say that I'm on, you know, I don't think that was intended. Zoe and Alex.
Hello there. Can I refer to something that Emma said when she spoke earlier on? That there was a Zoom meeting with the residents of Wittersham in November and December. Is that correct? Because we've had being where we are in this plan. I mean, the whole of the north side of the development proposed faces Piper's Fields. The whole of the south side faces the road. Half of the west side faces the community green, but the whole of the east side is my boundary. No one has come to us. We had to read this in the local freebie that comes through the door that this was even taking place. I can't understand how other people knew about it. And at the beginning of the meeting, you referred to Mount Pleasant. Well, Joan and David are not here because it has nothing to do with them, because it's us. It's Pear Tree Cottage. It's not Mount Pleasant. I don't understand how I feel that we've been totally left out, and it's the whole of the east side is our property.
Right, let me make some clarifications, Alex. When I mentioned Mount Pleasant, that's because that's the official description that is in the Ashford documentation. I mean, if they're wrong, they're wrong, but I wrote down what Yvonne wrote down, and Yvonne writes down what Ashford described it as. Wrong or not, that's what they called it. I usually refer to it as Stocks Road, north of side of Stocks Road or Stocks Road, but I was chided last time for not calling it what I did this time, which is the correct description. Now, I think there's a misunderstanding on your part. Perhaps we've allowed that to gather today, but the Zoom meeting, you said a Zoom meeting with residents.
The Zoom meeting in November and December, Emma said.
There are two things that you have conflated. The first thing is that councillors, and in a personal capacity, not as a council meeting, I stressed that before, councillors met with the developer and his team on a Zoom meeting back in November, I guess, or the very end of October, when, as a courtesy, they had shown us what they were going to expose to the public shortly afterwards. And we looked at that and we asked them questions. Now, immediately after that, as soon as they told me that it was ready to go on the website, which took them a week or two to organise, I then announced that the plans were available to see on the website for people, residents, to look at and to comment on. Now, in terms of the publicity for that, and I'm sorry you didn't see any of it, but it went in Outlook and Oxney. It went immediately before Outlook came out on Nextdoor, which I understand, of course, you may not be on Nextdoor. It's social media. 62% of the houses in Wittersham are. It went on the Parish Council website. It went on the Parish Council notice boards, and a notice went in the door of the shop. So in terms of a communications effort, there wasn't much more we could do. You know, Outlook's got to do with everybody through the door. The shop is used by a lot of people. Nextdoor is used by a lot of people. The websites of the website accounts and the notice boards are our official communications means. Everything had it, and that gave you the opportunity, which obviously you weren't able to take up because you didn't know about it, to look at their website, look at the plans. A bit less than is on the website of the Ashford now, but it was basically the same. They didn't alter anything. It's just they didn't put every single thing up. Like some of the long reports hadn't been finished. But all the floor plans and elevations were all there, and a bit of other stuff. And they invited residents to put comments in if they wanted to. There weren't a huge number of comments, but I think
I did comment on that.
Oh, sorry, I thought you hadn't seen it. Oh, you had seen it then. Good.
Yeah, from the Oxney, which I think is a marvellous issue that comes through our door. I did comment, and on the bottom of that, it actually said that they will respond to every email they get. I never had a response. I did mine at work. My wife did it at home. Neither of us had a response. And as it affects the whole of that east side, I would have thought, out of courtesy, there would have been a response. There was nothing.
All right, that's something that David perhaps wants to come back on. But thanks for that, Zoe and Alex. Can I, because I'm conscious time is getting on, can I ask if anyone else has something they want to raise, particularly that we haven't already gone around? Otherwise, I'll ask David and or Emma to pick up any things they want to before I move on to the next item of the public session, which won't take us very long at all. So, David or Emma, is one of you going to respond? And in particular, the point that Alex made about emails.
Yes, David.
Okay, I'll respond, shall I, Emma?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes, please.
Okay, so just picking up on a couple of points, if I may. One of the points what you asked about, I think, was about the offering the affordable units to the local people. And the normal way that's done is with a cascade arrangement. So whereby they're firstly offered to local people, then it cascades out if there is no demand. Does anybody want to ask any questions about that?
No, I'm sure it's just we'll probably be able to get a document that explains how it works, but if it's the standard system, we would be able to get hold of that and other people the same, or find out from Ashford, I guess.
Jeremy, it's something...
You'll negotiate it with Ashford Housing, won't you?
Yeah, it will be negotiated with Ashford Housing, the housing officer, and it will be part of the Section 106 agreement. So there has always been a commitment to ensure that there is a specific trigger mechanism so that you have got this, the local affordable housing will go to local people in the first instance. So that is being worked on and prepared. So there will be a Section 106 agreement, which will be alongside and will be issued at the same time as the decision notice.
Does that endure in the sense that if someone who either was or wasn't local needs has one of those houses and then in 5 years' time moves to Birmingham or dies, for instance, that then it goes local needs first again, or are all bets off after the first?
No, it would go local needs again.
Does that include self-builds, Emma?
Sorry, Paul.
Does that include the two self-builds? Do they go to local people as well?
No, although there is a register. So Ashford Borough Council have a register of people who are interested in self-build or custom build plots. There is a requirement to look at the register first to see if there's anybody on there who is looking for a plot in Wittersham, and the plot would then be offered to them in the first instance.
And they then buy that at a market price for the plot, presumably. Yeah. Okay. So, David, that's one. Thank you very much for that. Now,
a second point, I think, is the number of units, which it's very contentious. I can see that, but it is actually directly linked to the number of affordable units that are being provided, because the rest of the scheme cross-subsidises the affordable units, because there are costs that the affordable units can't bear. They can't pay for themselves. And I can go at length on the viability if anybody wants to understand that. But there are a multitude of costs that affordable just all the affordable does is cover the actual building cost of the houses themselves. It doesn't cover the cost of the infrastructure, the 106 cost, the open space, and all the other contributions and things. So the money has to come from somewhere, and it comes from building the market units.
Okay. Does that, when you say the houses only, does that mean not even the land contribution?
It doesn't make a land contribution.
Not that either.
No.
So in effect, if I'm just picking a number out of thin air, if the affordables ultimately with their rent perspective cover a cost of 150,000, then you spend 150,000 digging the foundations and piling up the bricks and the tiles and the plaster, and everything else has been given free to them.
Yeah, well, it's the building cost. So it's the whole of the house, the actual bricks and mortar, but not the land, not the service, not anything. And that's effectively why we have to have more units to cross-subsidise. Okay. I've done a lot of affordable housing in my life, and a lot of rural affordable housing, and it's always the same problem. They're just not viable.
Okay.
Right. The third point, perhaps, if I'm allowed to, I could mention is, can I talk about the sewage?
Yes, please.
The sewage itself, we're waiting for a response from Southern Water, who who are having the opportunity to comment on the scheme. If Southern Water say that the problem of the sewers is such, then we will have to solve that problem before we can actually build out a scheme.
Yeah.
They were the 3 points that I wanted to raise and answer.
Okay, thank you. Do you have other things from your perspective, Emma, that you feel you should add?
No, I think we've covered everything, Jeremy.
Okay. So, if I can, sorry, was that you waving your hand, Jill, or also I can see hello, Nicola and Audrey.
No, it's just me really. It's just an it sort of popped into my mind. What about building in villages, rural, following all the guidelines, and not for profit, to serve the people that live in rural communities, to preserve the integrity of rural villages? Are there schemes the government run that are not for profit?
Well, essentially, the housing authorities are the local authorities.
Jeremy,
Paul, go on.
Can I comment on that?
They can be built with equanimity of need.
The answer to that is you're absolutely right, and a number of the parish councils have attended the community-led building webinars and seminars actually before lockdown and housing. One of the ways a lot of parishes have solved this is through community-led housing. There's a lot available on the website, and you can read about that. And particularly, it's addressing what you're talking about. Where they've solved it, they've found land. Now, it's been mentioned to me by several people in our village, and this is not necessarily my view. I'm just passing this on now. The council does own land. There would be the opportunity of building on that land. It's called Coronation Field. Okay, it's council owned, and so there could be a community-led housing scheme. It's not, some people think it's the village green, Coronation Field. It's not. It's council owned land. It's used as an amenity at the moment, but there have been suggestions that the council look at that for an affordable housing scheme, and also to include a new community hall on there, because obviously the village hall is getting very near its sell-by date, and it's costing a lot in renovation. But that in itself, I mean, although it addresses, for example, some of the thoughts that Brian mentioned early on, that in itself causes all sorts of issues. And, the whole issue of we can have the affordable housing, but then we lose this green space right in the middle of our village that's used by a lot of people. The challenge we have on community-led housing is we haven't got any land. For example, if we were given or sold for £1 stocks, Piper's Field, yes, we could do it, but we don't have the land at the moment, and we don't have access to that. So you're right, it is a really, really good suggestion, but right at the centre of it lies the need for a plot of land.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And before you start, Miriam, let me be clear, that has not been a council discussion on building anything on Coronation Field. But it is true, it's the only land we own. My personal position as we sit here is that I like the amenity there, but who knows. Miriam, can I then just say that I think we need to close it off then? I don't know that we can carry on much longer. You're on mute, Miriam.
Just one, I've forgotten the gentleman's name now, but the gentleman made the point about that they've got to have the market housing in. I was having a look at the local plan document, and they're talking about delivery of local needs, and it says it's expected that local needs housing schemes are delivered without any cross subsidy from the market being required. And they say that they've had a good record on this in Ashford of being able to deliver it. I mean, there's one in Rolvenden, for example, not very far away. I take Paul's point. It very much depends upon someone coming forward with some land to be able to do that. But I mean, it could be a possibility. that somebody would come up with a bit of land. But obviously other villages have done it, so I don't think that we can rule it out here. And the principle should be it's local needs housing, and there shouldn't actually be market housing there as well. So, I mean, it's something to look at. I think these are options that we've got before us, but we seem to be getting forced down a track that maybe the village doesn't want to go down. But as I said, I believe quite a few people in the village would support a small scheme.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. We have to take account, of course, of the planning applications that come before us.
Yes, of course.
So, did someone else wave a hand? Otherwise, I think I need to move on. The last thing, I don't know if there is any of this, but we always ask within the public session, there are the opportunities for other items to be raised by residents if they have anything either on the agenda or that they want to be considered for future agenda. Has anyone got anything just to put in of that sort? Otherwise, thank you very much. Just before closing the public session, can I just remind residents and members of the public that they're entitled to stay and listen to the council meeting. Not all of you normally attend them. You're entitled to stay and listen, but you can't interject in it. It's only for the councillors. The safest thing to do is to all mute your microphones, and then you won't be tempted to say something that would break the rules. And can I just remind everyone yet again really, councillors are obliged to make up their own minds on the applications before us. They'll take account of what they've heard from residents tonight and what we heard last week. The eyes and ears are open. We've seen stuff in writing as well that's come into us, but it's as all 7 councillors, or 6 at the minute, their own balanced view of the pros and cons of each application. It's not simply a matter of following the wishes of those they hear from. They have to make up their own minds. Planning doesn't work by referendum, nor do council decisions of other sorts. Residents can make their own points direct to Ashford, and I encourage you to all do that. I'm sorry that they're going in much too slow on the website. The parish council isn't a channel for passing your views on. We pass our own views on, having listened to yours. But make your own views direct to Ashford. And while planners at Ashford are required to have regard to the view of the parish council, which is established by the 6 of us on behalf of the parish council itself, 6 councillors on the council, and the council forms a view, they're not required, Ashford is not required to follow our views either. In most respects, Ashford will reach an independent decision, though the views of Wittersham, the residents and the councils do potentially play some part in the decision that they reach, even if it's not the same one. Now, the parish council will seek to provide a detailed response to Ashford on the conclusions it reaches tonight. So it is necessary, please let me say to councillors, to express those points in the meeting, because then we will have to put them together into not only whether we support or object to individual applications, but the comments that we make about them, the suggestions for conditions if we feel they should be made, and so on. And I think for councillors worth them knowing that when I had a discussion with the current head of planning at Ashford, the temporary interim head of planning, in January, she did urge us always to put in, she said, doesn't matter how long it is, put in what you want to say. Do not feel that you're sort of under a restriction, so that council, Ashford Borough Council planners can take full account of it. Okay, so I will then close the public session and we'll open the council meeting proper. Thank you very much for everyone's comments so far. And we'll just get on. Everyone's entitled to stay if they want to. Right, back to our agenda. First thing is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of December. You had all of them from Yvonne before. I noticed there's a little typo that can be changed, but I mean it's nothing really significant. It's the fact that 4195 says none at the end of it, and of course that really refers to little 2. And also a clarification in 4198. It says after full discussion it agreed to support this application with 1 abstention, and it's not very clear whether that abstention was Alan, who had to declare a pecuniary interest. No, it wasn't. He was, of course, not part of it, and there was a second abstention. Alan didn't have anything to do with it, and another councillor abstained. Is there anything else on those minutes, or can we agree them?
Agreed.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. They won't, of course, get signed until we all meet again. Okay. Now, there are no matters arising, so we come to the planning applications in agenda order. The first one is Chopper Road housing proposal that we discussed in the public session. Now, can I please ask councillors, particularly these 2 big applications, but it applies to all the 4 we're going to talk about tonight, maybe to a lesser extent in the case of the other 2. As we go around councillors to gain views of what the councillors think, can I please stress that councillors should all be considering what other councillors think as well. So can councillors make their views, points or whatever, and after we've done all of that, then we will have a vote on who thinks what, rather than when we've often in the past, with much simpler applications, I've asked people's views and they've tended to give their view as well as saying whether they support or not. Leave the support out. Just give your views so that other people can hear what you think, and then we will all have heard what everyone else thinks, and then we can vote. So we don't have a vice chairman at the minute, who we usually start with. So who else would wish to start? Can I suggest maybe Paul?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this primarily as we said in the agenda, considering access only. I think it's difficult for me to consider design and layout and what have you. So my focus is primarily on access only.
Absolutely.
I did take the point that there seemed to be a bit of toing and froing in my view between what KCC might be saying, what ABC might be saying, what the developer might be saying rather, in terms of, can you get emergency vehicles up there? If you get an ambulance going up and it's trying to recover an acute patient and it meets the fire engine on the way, who's going to reverse up, what have you? The second point is that the access and the egress into the road there, the line sites and what have you, I just cannot see fundamentally it working. I think for me, the access bit is a very simple position to take, and I wouldn't be in favour. I know you're not asking at this stage, but I cannot see anything mitigating or recommending it.
Okay. Right, thanks, Paul. Right, next to Paul, we've got Colin.
You're mute, Colin.
You're muted. You're still muted, Colin.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a very important point, I feel, that Ashford Borough Council made to the developers, and I'll read it to you. Any significant increase in noise and disturbance to neighbouring properties caused by the increased vehicle movements would be unacceptable. It goes on to say that the people mostly affected will be in popular fields, and it would result in adverse harm to the neighbouring occupiers through undue noise and disturbance. Like Paul, I think the old issue comes down as to the availability to achieve the objectives and using that entry and the rest of the road upwards. And I have great difficulty, especially after this Saturday looking at the road, and all the people that was on it in terms of the vehicles to make a positive view at all as to their being able to achieve that. That's all I want to say at the moment. I'll make some comment when we're asked to vote.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Well, what have we got? Alan is next to Colin.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think there's no point in repeating all the adverse aspects of the access, and I agree with everybody else on that. It seems to me that this site behind Lloyd's Green, the developer has perhaps cast around looking for an appropriate access and has come up against difficulty each time they've identified an access, and this is at least the third attempt to find a way in. I'm afraid it doesn't come up to standard, and I for me it's too narrow, it's too busy, it's too difficult an access.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Leslie.
Yes, I agree with what both Paul, Colin and Alan have said, and I don't think I need to add much more, only that I think the idea is rather ridiculous. Come out onto that part of the road.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Yes, I agree with all the other comments. I cannot possibly see how emergency vehicles can get in and out there. The access itself onto that main road, it's just going to be gridlocked, and it's also very detrimental to a grade 2 listed farmhouse.
Okay, thank you. I'm pretty much aligned with other people. The access from B2082 for the large vehicles, especially with the parking opposite, and it's interesting to hear that it has to be with the parking, because I'd already figured that planning the parking was problematic. The chicane going up past Poplar Farm, which I understand ABC asked for in order to reduce the impact on the Poplar Farmhouse. I think that's been mentioned before. Doesn't appear to meet KFRS standards for fire. Double sharp bend at the top of the access lane, also a problem for traffic to self-organise as they're deciding who's going up and who's going down and who's going round the bend first and all the rest of it. The impact of the new widened access and the traffic and the loss of frontage wall and the hedges on either side. I think there's definitely one on the left, I think maybe one on the right. Plus, although it's a separate application that I think has been granted, it all comes in combination. The new garage in the front garden of the farmhouse and the turning circle to get into it from the central gate with the wrought iron gates. That, I think, is hugely damaging potentially on the grade 2 listed building setting. The impact of traffic in a busy and congested spot, the nearby bus stops, the shop parking, the parallel parking by Swan Cottages, the traffic disruption on the 2082 when they have to wait for people coming and going and trying to organise themselves there. The inspector's comments, now this is a more general point, and I don't think I should go into it particularly, but the inspector's comments, rather interestingly, on S61, which was the slightly larger site, he included these words, and this is quite interesting because it's not specifically AONB, which we always are brought back to. The inspector said that the field concerned forms part of an attractive area of open land which allows the countryside to penetrate the built form of the village. The site is therefore important in broad landscape terms, that's a good term, broad landscape terms, and the overall character of the village. Now that of course isn't access only, but then you don't have an access if you don't do anything else. So surface and foul water drainage, I think they're both potential issues, but a plan for both will need to be agreed by Southern Water and ABC. As it happens, I think an effective surface water plan, taking water from all the roofs and hard surfaces and passing it via an attenuation pond to the stream up in the north by the woodland would have the capacity to improve the overall site drainage. We've had criticism before that it's covered in water. subject to the maximum permitted discharge rate to the stream being sufficient. Foul water discharge to the sewer will be a matter for Southern Water to resolve with the applicant. Ian mentioned that already, I think, and might bring fresh attention to bear on existing problems, rather like Brian said in the public session, that we have problems with the sewage, but they won't get any better just by saying, well, we won't build any more houses then. The discharge, were the site to be consented by ABC for sewage, foul water would flow down Swan Street past the Finches where there's a historic problem. So Southern Water, I'm told, has now agreed to carry out engineering work there to alleviate a problem known to them, which they seem so far to have ignored. But they now know what that problem is and they know how to solve it. So in summary, returning to the access issue which is before us tonight, I find it hard to see how these proposals resolve the problem that was posed by the early rejection of S61, which was not only AONB, although it was, but it was also access from Woodland View and from Lloyd's Green. So that is my feelings about it. Can we then go round again and see how people vote on this? Paul?
Refuse.
Object.
Object, sorry.
We don't refuse, of course.
You're absolutely right.
We object. Next came Colin.
Object.
Next came Alan.
Object.
That was object, was it?
Object.
Yeah, okay. Leslie?
Object.
Sue?
Object.
Okay, and I will object. So that is a unanimous objection. And thank you for that. What I will do with Yvonne, or Yvonne will do with me, is we will compile our views on that. And then I think, Yvonne, I can't see you at the minute. Oh, yeah, there we are. Hello. Hello. Yvonne and I will compile something and then pass it around councillors, because clearly we've all said different things, but we'll compile something to see what can be put in as a collegiate response that flows from this item on the agenda to explain not merely the council objects, but what it objects for or about. Okay, thank you very much for that. The next item on the agenda then is Stocks Road. Can we do the same again then, please, without saying, I mean, it may be fairly obvious in comments, but without actually voting until the end? Can I ask Paul for his views?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard an awful lot of comments and a lot of input, and I'm sure I speak for all councillors that we're genuinely grateful for that. I was asked offline the other day after the planning meeting, would I be considering this, as a development on its own merits, or would it be part of the overall all the different ones coming on? And I think that's one of the challenges we face. I think most people would understand that I have a passion for approaching how Wittersham supports the affordable housing initiative, and I'm really delighted to hear that there wasn't anyone on this call tonight that said we didn't need affordable housing. Sadly, there were one or two in the public meeting who seemed to think there wasn't any need for affordable housing at all. The fact of the matter is, there's 2 points I want to make. Number one is it's been suggested by some residents that really what we really need for this village is actually what somebody called a blueprint for the future. It's not my phrase, it was theirs, and we need to consider a whole range of services and facilities in the village, not just a housing scheme like this in isolation. And they cover things people mentioned like sewage, footpaths, traffic calming, and broadband. It also includes the school, which, as many people know, has temporary porter cabin buildings at the moment, which have to have their licences or the permissions reviewed. And another aspect of this in terms of the overall amenities for the village, the lease on the sports field has only just over 4 years, I believe, to run. And so the need for us to consider this in a wider context and really put together a blueprint for the future is something that we really need to seriously look at, in my view. I don't think that should dissuade us from addressing the issues at the moment. The options for affordable housing, there are ideals, and if we had some land, that would be something that right now we could more actively consider. But David Tatterton did make a very valid point, which stood out for me. It's about viability. And I cannot see any way right now that we're going to get anywhere near affordable housing, maybe in the next 5 years or even more, unless we find some way of making it viable. So on balance, I think that there are a lot of conditions and comments that need to be put on here in terms of road safety, in terms of moving the 30-mile-an-hour boundaries out, and then enforcing them. Making sure, and I know that there are people in the village who are trying to put together a speed watch voluntary group, and I'm encouraged by people on the meeting tonight and the other day, if we can tap into that voluntary concern about speed, and some people step forward and actually take part in speed watch, we might get that traffic calming measure. The sewage piece is absolutely critical, and it's not just having a new development. The whole village needs that to be reviewed. The reason that Swan Street suffers so much is if you go down to Miles's house, the main sewer does a left-handed turn. Any engineer will tell you that's going to be the pinch point. But bringing it all together, I think that looking at the way forward, the current proposition that is there, forgive me for whether it's Mount Pleasant, what I refer to as the Stocks Road, to me seems to be the only possible viable opportunity that we have at the moment to satisfy the affordable houses for our young people and also our older people in the village who, frankly, a number of them are stuck at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, thank you. Colin?
Without repeating what the majority of what Paul said, which I would agree with, the only other concern that I have regarding developing a future plan is that we need to look at it in the wider aspect, which will include the local church. There will be a lot of problems arising within the village in the next few months concerning the future of the local church, and that has been a major part of this village of Wittersham for 700 years. Regarding the site itself, I would share the aspirations of Paul in terms of we do need something, we need to move forward. And so I saw that site as a very sympathetic one in terms of achieving some long-term objectives, knowing very well that a lot of people in the village will find it very difficult to accept. Stop.
Okay, thank you very much. Alan?
Thank you, Jeremy. I've lived in Wittersham for 42 years, and to be honest, I rather like it as it is. I don't particularly like change. However, looking back over a number of years when in discussion with the planners, they'd always led me to believe that once they had considered a planning application and refused it, and then if it had then gone to appeal and it again been refused, they would never consider an application on the same site again. So perhaps the flow of this at the Stocks rather surprises me. So something possibly has changed. There's been a lot of talk about the sewage and the amenities and foul water, and then things like the school and lack of space. I think if you just look at history a bit, when Basil Gett proposed that London should have an underground sewage system and other cities, everybody said, don't be ridiculous, you could never achieve that sort of thing. My goodness, since then, since Victorian times, this nation has led the way in developing sewage systems. So we've got the ability to solve that relatively straightforwardly. And to use that as an excuse not to move forward is patently inappropriate. Similarly with the school. I mean, the school will have to develop and change and accommodate in changing populations. And we again shouldn't use the fact that it's got restricted space to limit other types of development. I think we've got to move along with the times. It's difficult to think about how bodies higher than us will look at this, and there's a chance here for the village, I think, to look at all the proposals and select in the one that's best for local society, for the community. And I think we could possibly bury our heads and object to everything. And I think it's quite likely if we look at the two proposed developments here, and indeed other possible developments, that if we object to them all, eventually we'll get them all. If we don't choose to try and differentiate between the qualities of the various developments at this stage, then somebody will impose it upon us. If we can point out to higher bodies that we like one better than another and would suit the village in a better way, then there is a small chance we'll be listened to on that. Other villages have faced up to this sort of thing. We all know that Rotherham's got a big new estate of 30 or 40 houses, and Sissinghurst, I think, has 60 houses. I got a funny feeling that the plan is going to allocate the need for Wittersham to put in some sort of development. So here's our opportunity, perhaps, to help them select the best possible one. I would like to see the developers showing a bit more enthusiasm for enhancing village facilities, and we talked about this when we met them in October, November, and I just remind them of things like the playgrounds and the possibility of sports facilities, tennis courts, village hall. I was fortunate enough to go to Etchingham to get my immunisation last weekend, for my immunisation for COVID, and on the edge of the village there, they've really got a very nice, new, quite pleasing estate of houses of mixed price range. I looked at it carefully, and it works well. They have had some fantastic improvements and enhancements to their primary school, similarly to their village hall. And for Etchingham, it seems to me, on the edge of the village, it works extremely well. I don't see why Wittersham should not adopt the same sort of policy. I think that's about all I've got to say. Sorry to go on so long.
All right, thank you, Alan. That's helpful. Leslie?
Well, I've lived here for 34 years. I can't believe it. And I love this place, and I love where it sits in the landscape. I walk it every day, miles, with my dog around the village, around the island, down onto the marsh. I totally understand the concerns about our footprint, the Wittersham footprint on the landscape, and what's inappropriate and appropriate building land. But I come back to the question I asked earlier, which is, if we don't accept a proposal, for instance, like the one on Stocks Road, which, as one person said, the land there is sterile probably anyway, and it could do with regenerating and landscaping to increase biodiversity there. I don't really know where else, looking around the village, we're going to find a piece of land, even if it was made available, that would have less impact on the village. I agree with everything Paul and Andrew and Colin have said with regard to needing, to regenerate, need amenities either restored or improved. When I first came to the village, there were 3 shops, 1 post office, 2 pubs, 2 garages, etc. The village hall needs replacing. The playground is not fit for purpose. And as Colin says, we now have the situation where possibly we won't have a vicar or a vicarage anymore. We need to re-energise. And I do believe that having new people coming into the village. Not everyone will want to be part of the community, but some people will. And I think we've seen that at this meeting. So I think, yeah, we need to take action and either do it ourselves. I think some of it is possible with regards to dealing with the sewage problem and the road problem. I think it's within the remit of the council, with the help of the village, to do that. But can we put the money in that a new development, partly by the developers and partly by new residents coming in, to support some of the things we need? Can that happen unless we at some point accept that there has to be more building? And finally, again, the thing I'm really interested in, affordable housing. This Stocks Road scheme does allow for some affordable housing. I think that there is a greater need, and I think it was acknowledged even by Miriam tonight, that there's a greater need for affordable housing in the village than just those cited on the recent housing survey. So there is an opportunity then to use this development to get the housing we may need. However, I am very concerned about the sewage problem, infrastructure, the road, drainage, and I feel that we have to get this resolved, or have the developers actually resolve it for us, really, before we can accept the development of this size going forward. So I'm in a difficult position. I would like to support the development, but I really feel that these infrastructural problems have to be seriously dealt with prior to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Sue?
Well, I'd like to agree with everything that the others have said. The housing survey has indicated a need for low-cost housing and also for older persons' bungalows. I've had some families say to me they have relatives, children wishing to return to the village. I think it's an opportunity. They've probably not shown up in the housing need survey, bearing in mind it's now 2 years ago. The site itself, I think it's a very good mix of housing on the site. The whole site application is very well thought out. And I must say, the words that have been said, the school is oversubscribed in younger years. It is not full. Some years have spaces. It's very, very popular because it's now a growing and very good school. But it must be remembered that people travel from all over, Peasmarsh, St Michael, Tenterden, Appledore. So it would just be a case of the priority giving back to the villagers. Yes, the sewerage, roads, things like that are very much a problem and need to be sorted out. But that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Sue. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got quite a number of things I want to say, partly because I want to give proper credit to a lot of the points that have been made by our residents and not just sort of appear to ignore them. A range of reasons have been put forward by residents why the proposal should be opposed by the Parish Council, and moreover, in the fact that it should be rejected by Ashford, and if it was, then by the inspector, because there would obviously be an appeal. The planning system is there to set such objections against the rights of a landowner, apart from planning, to use the land as he thinks fit. And then come to a balanced view, this is to come to a balanced view in keeping with the law, the guidance, etc., and with a sense of the public interest. The public interest, I suggest, is to be found in examinations of the community, the look and feel, the street scene and so on, but also need. The The parish council has conducted occasional surveys into local housing need in the village to get a sense of what numbers of residents see a need arising in the following years for themselves, children, elderly relatives, etc. But they're never fully scientific. Many people don't complete them and circumstances change. But they do give a flavour of need for a part of the village population. The recent survey showed a need for about 15 properties, split evenly between a need for affordable housing and market housing, the latter typically for downsizing. But is that all? Well, the answer is we don't think it is. We think there's more needed than it shows. But of course, you can't be certain of numbers. In 2015, Miriam Lewis announced a finding from the Voices survey that showed very widespread public support in Wittersham for, as she said, up to 5 houses a year. Bearing in mind the up to part of that finding, I've regularly spoken of treating it as an average of 3 per year. And then subsequently, after I'd started suggesting that at council meetings when it was under discussion, I found that that matched with an ONS, Organisation of National Statistics, with a national population growth forecast, which they gave at a Calc AGM, of 15% over 25 years. Now, it just happens that while population growth isn't quite the same as housing need, I acknowledge that, 15% more houses in Wittersham is just over 75 houses, and you put it over 25 years, it's 3 a year. It was a sort of one of those things where I know that they're not quite the same thing, but the fact that they came out at the same number was quite interesting. Now, I'm grateful to Spencer King, who lives over at, I can't remember the name now, but we know, next to Alan. He sent councillors a note after Thursday's meeting when he picked up on comments I was making rather along these lines. He drew our attention to the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 11 and footnote 6. Now, that policy is hedged with double negatives. It's almost impossible to read. But it requires planning authorities, i.e. Ashford, to meet or beat objectively assessed housing need unless the policies of the AONB, etc., quote, provide a strong reason for refusal. And later it says, provide a clear reason for refusal. That's a place where it says the same thing twice. That means that ABC has got a clear opportunity, but not a requirement, that these proposals could be refused on the grounds of the AONB. Spencer also made a good point, in my mind, that this language suggests that a village like us in the AONB shouldn't feel the weight of a national housing shortage on our shoulders. There are other places better suited to cover the national need for housing than an AONB. I understand that. Now, I got Eve on a bit ago to check back for me on planning applications granted for new properties between 2010 and 2020. That's 11 years because it's inclusive. She found there were 17, although at least 3 of them aren't built yet, but there are 17 permissions. Under the rule of thumb of 3 per year, that means we've fallen 16 behind the yardstick. 33 minus 17, minus 17 leaves us with 16 sort of catching up. Now, you can question the 3 a year, there's no doubt about that, but the government presently wants to see 300,000 houses a year, which is roughly 1% of the housing stock. We've got about 30 million. And that would translate to Wittersham as 5 a year. Now, it's open to argument, therefore, that 3 a year, which matches the population growth and is well within the up to 5 a year that was found by Voices, is already 60% below the national target, 3 a year, 60% less than 5. Or, as Spencer argued, very elegantly, that Wittersham needn't try to adopt a national obligation as its own. But we already fell 50% below the 3. We did 1.5. So while need is open to discussion, the numbers are quite stark. The national target is roughly 5 a year in our terms, if we were to have to do it, but we're in an AONB, we don't. The sort of rule of thumb that we've had, which fits with population growth, is 3. We've done 1.5. Now, at this point, looking at need, perhaps it's appropriate to examine the proposed housing mix in the plans briefly. Residents often appear to want to see more affordable houses. Well, haven't we heard that Thursday and today? And perhaps smaller houses, but not the market houses that will pay for them to be provided. That's our usual problem. This is a very pure form of socialism in a way, but it's not the sort that works. Even with socialists in charge, they always need some money from somewhere to do it. And this is the way that our system nationally presently works. Incidentally, I did hear, just breaking off for a moment, Miriam kept saying that the Ashford policy, I haven't checked this, but the Ashford policy says that affordables normally shouldn't be cross-subsidised. Well, whether they should or whether they shouldn't, remember this is a hybrid scheme that was put forward by Emma. She explained that HOU 5 is building houses that can be market on the outside of the village, subject to A&B we'll come back to. The affordable bit is separate, and they were putting them together, HOU 2, HOU 5, affordable market. Now, the proposals in front of us are for 12 affordable out of 30 in total, of which 3 are one-bed bungalows, perfect for an older person who wants to downsize to a space that they feel they can look after. 6 are 2-bed, of which 1 of them is a bungalow, and then 3 are 3-bed. That's out of the 12 affordables. The market housing, again, is not big. That I've come across this in Sevenoaks as well as here sometimes. Oh, we don't want big houses. We don't want big executive houses. 5 of the market housing is 2-bed bungalows. 2 are 3-bed houses and 9 are 4-bed houses. So it's a real range, and very rare to see so many bungalows, I suspect. Now that represents a total of 9 bungalows out of 30, 30%. And 14 of the total are 1 or 2 bedroom out of the 30, almost half. It's also, by the way, a density of under 5 acres. So where we heard in the past, particularly 5 years ago, about all this was just trying to make a load of money out of a field, well, I'm not saying that they won't make money, but it's certainly not exploitative in the usual sense. This is very low density. Did I say it's under 5 an acre? 6.25 acres for 30 houses. There's also a range of living space and downstairs facilities that add to the overall utility of the different properties. That appears to me to offer a good range for new families, growing families and older downsizers. So some of those houses, for instance, have downstairs bedrooms, even if they're not a bungalow. Now, the other main reference commonly made to the NPPF, the earlier one was paragraph 11 and footnote 5 or 6. We often hear quoted to us, paragraph 172 and footnote 55. This paragraph is about AONBs and similar designations, broad, national parks and what have you. And I congratulate Miriam and others who've even got a key element of that paragraph into common parlance around the village, namely that the proposals cannot be consented by ABC or by implication supported by us because, quote, planning permission should be refused for major development other than in exceptional circumstances. If we've heard that once, we've heard it 10 dozen times. Planning permission should be refused for major development other than in exceptional circumstances. Now, so far so good, except the footnote, which says, whether a proposal is major development is a matter for the decision maker, taking into account its nature, scale and setting, and whether it could have a significant adverse impact on the purposes for which the area has been designated. So it's up to Ashford to decide whether it's significant, and they will decide that taking into account nature, scale, setting, and whether it would have a significant adverse impact on the purposes for which the area has been designated, not an impact on anything you just happen to feel about, not an impact on sewage, for argument's sake, an impact, this is talking AONB, on the purposes the AONB was designated for. Now, I spotted last Thursday that Miriam referred to a view, she put the view, that in terms, she said, the inspector had decided that 27 houses at Stocks Road 5-6 years ago was a major development, so this one must be too. But that's not true. In fact, according to ABC, who talked to us at a senior level, who talked to me about this, it was Landia who first took the view, I don't know if they were encouraged to, but they took the view that it was major development, and ABC happily accepted that view. And once it was described as major development in this context of the NPPF, then of course it had to have an exceptional reason. They felt, Ashford did, that Landia had been in error to have ever conceded that point. They should have refused it. They should have said, no, it's not major at all. Now, there might have been confusion over wording because ABC also used to treat a scheme of over 10 houses as major, quote unquote, and it had to go to the planning committee. But that's changed recently. They now only take automatically to the planning committee applications for over 50 houses. So 30 is not now major in that sense, and it won't go to the planning committee unless there are particular reasons it should do. Normally, now it would be dealt with by an officer. Now, in any event, the judgment of major or not in the context of the NPPF 172 is a decision for ABC to reach because they're the decision maker based on the words I've quoted. And just before leaving Para 172, it also says, consideration of such applications should include an assessment of the need for the development, including in terms of any national considerations. So although Spencer in his note to us said, look, you can't get carried away with the national, it's actually brought in again anyway. Now, it's not very clear, to be honest, and this is typical planning, it's not very clear whether that phrasing of national considerations is intended to relate to consideration of only the major ones that it says should almost always be rejected, or whether it applies to any AONB application to which the rest of the paragraph refers. I can't give you an answer on that. But certainly national considerations are for the need, are brought in.
Jeremy?
Yes,
Jeremy?
Go on, Alan.
I've got a funny feeling we're ceasing to be able to assimilate all this now.
Okay, well, I understand and sympathise with the problem. The trouble is that we've been attacked over the last week for not listening to villagers, and so I'm trying to go through.
But I think we are doing.
Well, I understand your point. There's no good answer to that because the council meeting is the council meeting. What I will do is I will jump ahead. I think, therefore, we've talked enough about AONB, and we know in any case it's an Ashford decision. Traffic speeds, it's already been raised by others. A point that hasn't been mentioned, though, extending the limit 120 metres eastwards beyond Stocks Way, apart from the steps proposed in the application, the rest of them, that actually puts it further up a straight section of road, quite a long way. And that straight section means our SID can move up, that detects car's speed, and also you get a decent space to put in a speed watch if residents want to use it. They wouldn't manage on Stocks Road very well at the minute because of where the 30 limit starts. It certainly wouldn't do any good, for instance, to Roger, who wants the speed reduced by the time they're coming down past his house and past the new entrance. So that 120 metres, which we can ask to be conditioned, it's part of the application anyway, is very helpful. Foul and surface water, I've already spoken about that in the context of Poplar Road. I think the same applies, that it would probably drain the field quite successfully just by taking all the water off the roofs and the roads and taking them pipes down to the gill. Foul water, everyone talked about sewage, that's got to be sorted out. But in fact, down Swan Street, there is work to be done there. Access to the site on foot, briefly, should the proposal be consented. They've drawn it along the north side of Stocks Road to join with the existing footway just after Tile House. I think that there are issues there concerning water coming off the site and running down the road, which is a menace. That needs to be dealt with. I can talk to the applicant if this gets supported tonight a little bit more in detail about that. I won't worry you with that now. But there are issues about the footpath, where it's built, how they deal with the water that is pouring down the road. I won't go into this in any detail, but we have been told endlessly over the last 5 years that we would be losing a field of high-grade agricultural land. It isn't, it's actually mediocre on a natural England site. There's a map of it. It is actually grade 3. There are 5 grades. It is 3. It is not 1. It is not 2. It's definitely not high grade. So a number of important issues raised by residents. I've referred to them, given my views where I could. Against that, there's the abiding question of what housing types and numbers will help the village community to remain sustainable and where it can best be provided. That's the question that Ashford will decide, to which councillors are able to make their contribution this evening. And I hope I've successfully covered a lot of the points that residents objecting have raised with us. So can we go round then, please? Paul, what's your view in terms of voting? You're on mute.
Having made my points and my reservations on services, my decision is I will support.
Thank you. Colin? Yes, you support. Good, thank you. Alan?
Support.
Thank you. Leslie?
I would really like a concrete proposal, to have had a concrete proposal from the developers about the, what amenity they would either provide or contribute to. I think that's very important. And so in the absence of that, although there's a lot about the scheme, as you know, I support, I'm going to abstain.
I don't think really we weren't in a very good position to discuss anything very much until we knew where we were in terms of support or object. In fact, if it was Ashford and they were getting to the point of deciding it there, they would then be negotiating an S106 afterwards, in my understanding, so that it kind of gets approved subject to, and then it just...
I know, but it's also the sewage and the road and...
Sure.
You know,
I'm not criticising I just don't think we could do anything about the...
No, it's very difficult. I really have agonised over it. And
that's all right.
So I abstain.
What we need to do anyway, as I said about the other application, the big one, is that we need to think immediately after this as to what we're going to put into Ashford that pulls in the points that we have talked about. And so the things that are worrying you can be put to Ashford anyway. They don't necessarily take any notice of us, but they can be put to them. I mean, ultimately, it's pretty clear that the council's view overall will count a certain amount. Your abstention obviously doesn't count at all, but that's fine. I'm very happy with that. I just didn't want you to feel that you haven't got a clear understanding. But that's...
No, my understanding, I believe, is clear.
Good. Okay. That's good. Sue?
I withhold my, I don't know, I reserve judgment.
Okay, Sue?
Support.
Thank you. And given the points I was making earlier, some of which I abbreviated, I would support it too. So we have supported that with 5 in favour and 1 abstention. Thank you very much. That then takes us on, as far as the agenda is concerned, we haven't got so much more. We've got a couple of smaller planning applications. The first one is the disused pole store at Knoll House. Can we go around again? Paul, what are your views?
Support.
No views?
I think he was very clear. It's practically approaching like I think Alan's suggestion to Alex McIntosh to go and look at the one in that lane he mentioned is a good one, but I see they're having no impact on the environment. The designs are looking very similar. Nothing particularly radical about it, and I wish him well.
Okay. Colin?
I support too.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
I think we've actually...
Has Alan disappeared?
Yeah.
Okay, Alan is totally absent. Leslie?
I support.
2?
Support.
And I will support. So we've got 5 and an absent abstention. The next one then, we're now not doing summer house as I explained before, because they're changing the drawings. So we come now to the orchard at Swan Street with the house, the 2 houses that were being done under GPDO, which are now asking to do them as 2 separate 2-storey houses, not on the same footprint anymore. Can we have opinions on that, Paul?
Yeah, I think this is a slightly more complicated one in the sense that the original perception from the new buyers was that they was going to be building a similar footprint as previously said, and I do understand the concerns that the neighbours have. From the point of view of traffic, that's always a difficult one. It is a very dodgy bend, and that's never going to change around there. Luckily, it's not as much of a thoroughfare as, for example, Poplar Road, but it is something to be careful of. What encouraged me was I think the agent's offer to talk to the neighbours about what could be done in terms of mitigating the impact. I think in terms of privacy, that I would strongly recommend they look into, because if ever there's an example of where things succeed, it's always where Alan's just coming back in again, by the way. It's always where the developers or neighbours discuss these things and talk it through and reach an amicable situation, because whatever happens once it's all built, everyone has to sort of live next door to each other. From a planning application view and looking at the designs, I can't see anything from a planning point of view that I could find reasons to object to. So I would strongly advise that the neighbours take up the developer's offer and actually, see exactly what they can propose to make it as acceptable as possible, all round.
Thank you, Colin.
I would support subject to what Paul's just said, because I think there needs to be some discussion between the developer and the neighbour to clarify the situation. I don't wish to, oppose it, but I think that there should be some understanding that they'll actually get together and discuss that and come to some arrangement. If they can't, then I would oppose.
Okay, that's a bit tricky.
I know it is.
I think one of the things that I detected, well, I'll come to that in a minute. Let's go through what we're doing. Opposes, can't resolve. Okay. Alan, I saw you put your hand up, and we know that you felt that you needed to take a break.
No, it wasn't that. I'm afraid my computer froze.
Oh, okay, right.
But going back to the last one.
The previous one, you weren't here for the cold store. Did you have a view?
Yeah, I support that.
You supported it. Okay, I'll put you down on that.
And I heard Paul and Colin's comments on the orchard, which I agree with, but on balance, I support it.
Okay. Then we get to Leslie.
Yes, I support it on the same basis as everyone else has said, and hopefully they will manage to resolve their difficulties.
Yes, I was under the impression that it was going to be 2 semis built on the existing site that's there now. I have grave concerns about the access. I think it's very unsafe. At the moment, the stuff that goes in and out is moved usually very early, moving the plant out. Now, if there's 2 houses there of that size, we're talking at least 2 cars per property. With the footpath as it is, people have had to jump out of the way so they don't get run over. So on the basis of that, I have to object.
Okay, thank you. That's me then. I'm concerned. ABC accepted the access previously. We put that over to them, and they evidently they either accepted it or they felt that they couldn't involve it because it was a PDO permitted development application. I don't know which, but either way, our understanding is that went through. Now it's a new concern with the houses on a new footprint. I think that the concerns of the neighbour that he expressed to us, which other councillors have already commented on, was partly about which way windows faced and privacy, but it was also partly the fact that the houses were no longer on the old footprint of the shed. They had been moved, one to the front, one to the back. In other words, that long is a big site. That long site has got a house sort of up somewhere near the bungalow that Clyde lives in, and one down by the back garden. I can't remember the exact layout, but it's something like that. And so I'm not sure in my own mind that there is an opportunity for a meeting of minds, even if they have that discussion. I think that the offer was made that they could talk about things like windows. I'm not sure that there was a suggestion that they could redivide the land up to make that work. But one way and another, now everyone's heard. I know some people have been talking about what they support, but I don't know if anyone wants to change their position. Are you still, Paul, on your what you said before? Are you supporting this?
I think that if it's possible, I would say support it with the condition that the privacy issues are addressed.
Yeah, okay, fine. And Colin, that was the same basically.
Exactly the same, yes.
But you said oppose if can't resolve. Is that just privacy or resolve objections generally?
No, privacy.
Privacy. Okay. Alan is supporting on balance. Is that the same again?
Yes, I'm with Paul and Colin on this.
Okay. Leslie?
I support.
Good, thank you. And Sue, you've got grave objections. You're objecting, and I object. I think that these 2 houses are they're too much in terms of popping them out in the countryside there. Getting them in on the old footprint was another matter altogether. That has special policies and all the rest of it, I think. But this one, just asking for the 2 houses, I know Ashford have accepted the access, seemingly, or else they couldn't object. But the access is a problem. I think that it is just slipping 2 houses in the countryside, having lost the I don't mean the excuse quite, but the reasoning by which they could be done before in the old shed was a particular case that is allowed typically, or can be allowed. I think that one is no longer applying, and therefore, could you build 2 houses anyway you wanted? No. Therefore I'm objecting. But in fact, I think that, subject to some wording on our response, is actually a support for 2. Is that right, Yvonne?
Yes, well, I've got 2 object, 1 support, and 3 support with the condition.
Yeah, indeed. So, subject to the conditions, it's supported for 2, but it is subject to that condition. Yeah, we'll have to find the form of words for that. Okay, thank you for that. The next one is an easy one, I think. To consider Council's request for support with regard to COVID-19 financial support package, local councils and remote meetings. Now, I looked at it again. I don't think they're actually asking our support with COVID-19 financial support. They've done that directly with the Secretary of State and have asked MPs to help them with that. But they are definitely asking us to lobby our MP on remote meetings. I don't think there's an issue with that. The remote meetings thing, by the way, runs out in I think April or May, and there's an anxiety that remote meetings may still need to carry on, otherwise people can't meet anymore. So, but so far the government hasn't moved on that. So can I ask, are people happy that we draft something along those lines? Alan?
Yes, agreed.
Everyone's happy with that? Okay, good. Now, to consider and agree to purchase a replacement printer for the clerk, she has an inkjet printer which eats ink cartridges, as you would expect, which are always charged for on the expenses. The printer is getting a bit doolally, and she's also out of cartridges. I've pointed out to her, subject to space in her room, that a laser would actually be the better answer, really, because they're a lot cheaper if you get the right ones per page than inkjets. It's just a matter of finding one that will fit in the space she's got and isn't too heavy. Can I suggest that we've still got to go and source what would be a suitable machine, but can I suggest that if councillors are happy, we go away and figure that out and do it? I would imagine that the cost of the machine, which comes with the initial 3 cartridges, smaller version, but the initial 3 cartridges is probably in the sort of 3, without VAT, it's probably in the £300 region. It might be a bit less, it might be a bit more. The cartridges then come in quite big lumps of money to buy them, but they last for thousands and thousands of pages rather than hundreds and hundreds. So can we work on that basis?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeremy?
Yes, go on.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Jeremy, my computer, I'm afraid, is about to switch me out again. So if I disappear, it's not for any other reason that my battery's gone flat, despite being on maximum charge.
Okay. All right.
Mine's working the same way. You'll know why.
We'll wave you goodbye and talk about you behind your back.
Of course.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Understood. Fully understood. I hope it provides lots of amusement.
I should say that the printer could have been done under the delegation to Yvonne, but because it's rather close to Yvonne, it seemed better to bring it up at a council meeting first. To authorise the payment of the clerk's expenses, which she has sent us.
Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
And
it's £87 odd. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The next thing was the latest transaction statements.
Yes.
Agreed. Good. And then we've got a receipts and payments. It's a bit different because it's the way the new computerised accounting system produces it. It's got basically the same information. It just gives us a bit more information than we had before. And as of the end of December. Everyone happy with that? Okay.
Yes.
I have them in advance on the computer to study them anyway. Okay, and that is the end of our agenda.
Date the next meeting.
Well, it'll be an extraordinary one when we have it.
Right. Date to be confirmed.
It will be date to be confirmed. It'll be fairly soon because we've got to pick up when Summer House is available to review as a planning application. And there's at least one item I know that we want to put on it. We've got to have a council meeting on. Can't be done under the delegation. We'll do that as soon as possible and anything else that comes up.
Fine.
But Right, so Yvonne will solicit dates, but as long as we're doing them on this Zoom basis, I think the question of just doing them as and when makes most sense rather than going through them simply because of the dates in the diary. Is everybody
okay?
That?
Thank you.
Okay, if Greg and Martin are still there, then thank you for sitting it all out. And Miriam as well. If you're still there, then thank you for sitting it out. I thought it was a very busy and constructive session. I'm conscious that some people will be disappointed by what we decided, but I hope that we have given a good review of their input. Oh, hello, Nick, as well. Nick's still there too. Right, thank you very much.
Well done.
I'll close the meeting.